Paul Claire, all are welcome this morning. It's good to see you. I don't actually see you at all. You see me. Uh, but we both will see Pat McGart in one moment. Pat, how are you this morning?
Granted, Jude, it's quite Baltic out there this morning.
Oh,
We have friends from Tasmania here, and they left glorious sunshine on Monday, and by God, I'm sure they're feeling it now. They're away off to West Donegal this morning. But by the way, one thing I noticed this morning, RT, it snowed quite a few times up in Donegal. Never mentioned this morning. What's leading on all the news bulletins in RT? Snow around Dublin because it intervened. The capital city. I always think, we're Donegal is basically the Alaska of Ireland. Nobody even knows what's happening up here. But a couple of bits of snow or a bit of wind down about Dublin, and it tops the news agenda. I find that amazing. Like, Jude, we could be blowing off our feet up here, and it wouldn't even merit sort of a mention towards the end of the news bulletin. But
does
if there's
Donegal, is
this
it?
bit of a storm around about Dublin or the East Coast, where suddenly it's top news.
But you see, Donegal has always occupied a strange sort of thing. There are people who say that Donegal should have been part of Northern Ireland. Um, and the obvious fact is that you're the furthest away from Dublin in terms of
Uh,
travel and so on. Maybe the A5 will make a difference to that. But yeah. But I mean, sure, all the people west of the Ban think the same way about Belfast.
yeah,
Everything
yeah,
happens in Belfast. Nothing happens in
yeah.
Derry or,
Well, I've
well,
always said Donegal is sort of this. It's like the Cinderella County of Ireland.
yeah.
It's the furthest north, but it's not in Northern Ireland, and it's so
Hmm.
far south, and like I say, that it's out of sight and out of mind from Dublin. It's neither of the north nor of the south.
And there's loads of not just Derry but Belfast holiday homes owned by
Absolutely,
and
yeah, yeah.
visited. So
Uh,
the
and
the
Jude, we were talking the other day. People in Derry, I was chatting to another guy, Gareth from Downey, actually, and
yeah,
he said Derry is actually a southern city trapped in the north. Derry does not see itself as northern at
that's,
all, not in the
that's very
least.
true.
Yeah, I
Very
remember
true.
one day one of the photographers in the journal, like Larry Doherty, said to me, "Oh, you should have seen our troops," and I thought he meant British Army or something. He said, "No, I mean the Irish Army and our troops." And there's a man who was born, raised, and died in Derry.
I couldn't agree with you more, Pat. I'm forever saying that, by the way. I cannot agree more. I could agree more, but I do agree fully with you.
Oh.
Uh, Derry always struck me as being different. People are different. For a city, it's just they are different from certainly the northern. They don't have that same. Maybe it's the way they talk. They don't talk with that broad sort of northern accent. It's
No,
it's something else. I don't know what you would describe it as. Um, to my ear, it always sounded much more musical than the
yeah,
accents to the east of the province.
yeah.
Anyway, enough of that, Pat. I can't be going on with
Right.
weather and accents and rubbish of that kind. Ah, dear, dear, dear. My heart breaks at this first item. It really does. We're going to let's tell the people. So we're going to deal with several things. We're going to deal with the Palestinian food aid. We're going to deal with the breakthrough of George Galloway in Rochdale, and we'll go on to something else after that. Okay, starting with my heart sinks to even say it, those food aid trucks that went into Palestine. What part of it was the northern part?
The
And
northern part of Gaza, yeah.
and
Apparently, there
over
haven't been
100
any
people
food
died.
trucks up there for nearly a month, Jude.
Hmm.
Like, there's at least 112 dead, and there's I heard somewhere this morning it could be up to 800 injured.
Oh.
Jude, let's get this clear. I saw, and I'm actually getting disgusted now every time I see an IDF spokesman. The IDF, their story changed two or three times yesterday, but finally last night they sort of admitted. Right, here's the thing, Jude. They're saying they weren't responsible for it. But if you shoot live ammunition into a crowd, a desperate crowd, people who haven't had food. There was a doctor on, by the way, last night on Sky. I saw it late last night. He's saying we're starving here, and he says I don't mind admitting that we're eating. Apparently they're drinking toilet water.
Good
That's the only,
goodness.
and so on. Anyway, the bottom line, Jude, They are now admitting, because I think the evidence is so overwhelming and they can't deny it. And I think there's video evidence and so on. So they had to own up last night, the IDF. So and of course it's shades of bloody Sunday. They're blaming the victims for their own deaths. But the bottom line is, Jude, they fired live ammunition at a crowd who were trying to get food, desperate people. So whatever happened after that, whether lorries did run over or there was tank shells or whatever, I don't know what happened. The catalyst for it, without question, were the actions of the ADF, and for to do a Pontius Pilate and wash their hands of it now is disgusting. They're responsible for it, and Jude, it's as simple as this: you sit and watch, and you sort of wonder how much more does the Western world need before Joe Biden and Richie Sunak comes out and saying what Israel is doing right now is genocide, and it's disgusting, it's grotesque, it's unbelievable, and that they are getting away. Dude, this sort of prevarication to allow the Israelis to keep doing what they're doing is actually stomach churning at this stage. I am absolutely disgusted by them.
I think a lot of people will remember, as much as they will remember the things that Israel did, they'll remember the things that the UK and the US didn't do. Really, I think I'd say I think it's a fact that nightly we're seeing these scenes. We used to have Boris Johnson and company appearing to talk about the virus. Now every night we're seeing these. Even it has knocked the Ukraine off. There's more people died, I think, in Gaza than have died in Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
God almighty. And there was a guy, I heard a guy on last night, I think it was, and he said that he had been shot and he had been run over by one of the lorries.
That's the guy I saw, Jude.
Oh, God. And the other thing was the Israeli Defense Forces did a shot from above, a picture taken from a helicopter or something. And it showed you blurry little figures running around.
That was from a drone, Jude.
I thought it was ironic. They should be insects almost. They look like insects, and that's how the Israelis would see them.
But here's the thing. That the Israelis are primarily blocking journalists going into Gaza. In fact, I think this week 30 or 50 journalists, I think it's 50 actually, international journalists, have gone publicly with a letter saying that there's no witnesses to what's going on in there, and as the Israelis are, and of course, some of the Palestinian journalists have been shot dead by the Israelis. Jude, not only are they starving in them, and not only are they bombing them, but they're using snipers right, left, and center. And they're killing totally innocent people. And last night I saw on either BBC or ITV. They're claiming 70% of the people who have died are women and children. And Joseph Borrell, who's the EU foreign chief, says Israel is without question using hunger as a weapon in this war, which he says is totally against international law. But here's the thing: see, when this is all over, will it be back to normal? And Israel, we're going to come on to Galloway. But I heard somebody referring to Galloway last night as a terrorist supporter. Like, who are the terrorists in this world? This sort of old establishment that the terrorists are people who oppose Israel. That day's done, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. The Guardian did a nice thing this morning. They did, what did the Palestinian authorities say happened, and what did the Israeli authorities say happened? And the Palestinian authorities say that Israeli forces carried out a massacre, opening fire on a crowd of people who'd gathered in the hope that food could be distributed. Israelis say, oh no, they were killed and injured from pushing, trampling, and being run over by trucks. And then they said they fired warning shots in the air. I mean, I suppose
the hospital and said that most of the people who came there had bullet wounds. But Jude, here's the point. Let's get this clear. See all this sort of spin and sort of propaganda and all that. Jude, the bottom line, the catalyst for this was Yeah, and even the people who were there are saying there's no doubt about the NGOs, the amnesties, the WHO, the UN are saying that the catalyst for it was when the Israelis opened with live fire, and of course the Israelis are saying that the soldiers felt threatened by the crowd, so they opened fire. So, in other words, 112 people are dead, 800 up to 800 or so are injured. But as usual, the Israelis are saying it's not our fault, even though, by the way, not a single Israeli injured, and there's 112 Palestinians dead. But the Israelis are sort of saying it's the Palestinians' fault. I know it's Palestinian people's fault. Yeah,
Well, the report,
that is standing human logic and human understanding on its head.
well, they're just going to brazen it out. The local hospital, according to the local hospital management, the report in the Guardian said most of the injuries were bullet wounds. And
Yeah.
Here's a terrible detail. I know it doesn't matter, but they say there weren't enough ambulances to take the casualties to hospital, so quite a few were taken to hospital on donkey carts.
Yeah. Jude, there was three last night again because I sat and watched it. Jude, I've stopped watching this last while. I just can't take it anymore. But I saw a young fella with three dead bodies on an open cart. They weren't moving, and I don't know where he was taking them.
The thing I'm seeing is that there was a time when the West would, well, there was a time actually when all of us embraced the idea of Israel. Maybe in '67, some of us were cheering on this small nation that had fought off the many nations that were around them and were looked like they might invade them. But I think all that has totally changed. I can't see the people of Gaza or the Palestinians ever in 100, 200 years forgetting what happened. The interesting thing for me is when I look at certainly decent reporting, and Channel 4, for example, I'm not saying Al Jazeera now, I'm just saying Channel 4, they are quite clearly totally skeptical of every word that Israeli spokespersons say. They're coming on and they're saying stuff, and the reporter will ask them questions and say, you're not answering my question. Did this happen? There's an antipathy to the whole Israeli playbook on this thing that has grown enormously, I think, among even British media.
Jude, the Israelis have this thing called Hasbara. It's a propaganda. It's all their spokespersons are trained. Have you ever noticed they don't answer a direct question when it's to do with Israel? They revert to say Hamas is to blame for this. Hamas is to blame. Hamas is using human shield. Hamas started this on October 7th, etc., etc. And then when they're asked, but there Israeli killed 100 people, I have no knowledge of that. Suddenly, so it's and then they don't have to answer or explain that. Dude, I think it's reaching this. By the way, the other thing, there was a report in one of the papers that the Israelis have now something like 1,600 people on social media, like X and Twitter, full time, doing, peddling out Israeli propaganda, etc., etc. It's become, they actually paid professionals doing this. So when you find yourself arguing with somebody on X, you're actually dealing with a guy who has fact sheets and is getting stuff. Like one night, Jude, I was on X, and I made some comment. This guy came back in about 2 seconds with about 600 words. And I was going, what under Jesus did anybody type 600? In other words, it was one he had prepared earlier. It was they are professionals. And if you're on Facebook or X, these guys, and you notice, by the way, it's the same people all the time.
Yeah,
like they obviously don't work, so this is their job.
Yeah. I wonder, what was very interesting for me would be if there was a survey done and you could get an honest answer from Jewish people living in Britain or Ireland and ask them what are their views on the conflict that's happening in Gaza. I wonder, would you get the truth from them, first of all? And secondly, how would they split, assuming that they would split? How many of them would lean in sympathy towards Israelis, or how many of them would be saying, this is appalling, not in my name is this happening? What do you think, Pat?
Jude, I can't remember the name of the guy. He's a firm Alan Shatter. That's his name. He is unknown. He is one of the leading people in the Jewish community in Dublin. He's a non-adulterate apologist for what's going on. Israel is quite entitled to do what it's to do. If it means getting rid of Hamas and so on, and what happened on October 7th justifies everything. Judah, I think the old idea of the liberal Jewish guy.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that has disappeared. By the way, somebody pointed out to me one time before. No, you're to refer to the thing you're saying about 1967. The guy pointed. He said, "Point this out to you. Contrary to the perception, the Arabs did not invade Israel. Israel attacked first, and
Well,
he
it was
says
always
they've been
put
doing it
as a
ever since."
preemptive strike.
But he says the propaganda was they were defending themselves.
Mm-hmm.
He says
Mm-hmm.
Israel is always defending itself. Yeah, he says they're the ones always doing the attacking. He says, do you ever notice? He says everybody's this idea that the 6 Day War that the Arabs started. It didn't. The Israelis attacked them.
Yeah, well, that's true. The Israelis fired the first shot, but I think most of us accepted the fact that they were under threat at the time, or they saw themselves as being under threat genuinely, and that their preemptive strike. To be honest with you, people I talked to then would have admired it to some extent. And
Yeah.
said, one nation taking on.
I grew up in a house. My dad lived through the Second World War, and I remember as a wee boy being influenced by. This is a plucky wee nation. They're surrounded by big Arab states, and they're a democracy. And remember all the kibbutz. After the Second World War,
kibbutz was a wonderful
we
thing.
thought the Israelis, that what happened to them, they would be a beacon for humanity and decency and all the rest of it. It's gone the opposite way. Like they're despicable.
But
What's
Pat,
happening in Israel? And in fact, they vote for people that are as much fascist as some of the people they condemned years ago.
That's true. I come back to my question though. Give us an estimate of what proportion of the Jewish people living in Britain or Ireland, leave aside those in the States, Britain or Ireland, who if asked would say Israel's acting right. What kind of support? Because we always make this distinction. There's Israel and there's Jewish people here, right?
Yeah,
that's a different matter. But they'd obviously have views on it. They must have views on it.
I would go as high as 90% of Jewish people would support Israel. Now, Jude, there's some very decent people who Jewish people are sort of saying not in my name, and there's and there are quite a few of them in America. Funny enough, much more than here. The only people I have seen here are based, and Jude, there's always exceptions, but I think by and large, when it came to sort of the whipping of the crutches, I think a lot of Jewish people saying it's the only state we have. So my country, right or wrong.
Yeah. I think that's a reasonable interpretation. I'll go along with that. Although, mind you, one of the most ardent spokespersons against what was happening in the Middle East and what Israel was doing. Now, I'm talking about 10 years ago, not now. 10 years ago, I remember at a West Belfast Talks Back, there was a Jewish woman stood up and started laying into what Israel was doing. And that I virtually shove her a gag in her mouth and put her down eventually. She was going on so long. But she felt fiercely, I don't know, I suppose she saw people like her as being seen in reflection, as somehow being behind it.
There's a woman who worked for Rona, she worked for RT years ago. She is a very liberal Jew. Basically, she said quite a few years ago, not in my name, she wanted Israel to be a totally different place. Tolerant, acceptance, diversity, liberal, and so on. And she didn't like the way it was going. And people like Netanyahu, you sort of go like, hey, there's 30,000 dead. God knows how many injured.
More than that, 31,000.
31. Gaza has almost been obliterated, and so on. And you sort of go, and we're watching it almost like it's a slow movie, and you're going, and yet it seems to be never ending. But here's the thing: where are we going from here? Where does this stop?
Well, from what I can gather, the Israelis are saying that the Gaza will have to be rebuilt. They'll rebuild it. They'll keep control of that. Their settlers will settle there, and the Palestinians will continue to live there. Will be tolerated, but the authorities will be, as I understood it, that they would be the Israeli government. Now, maybe they're including in that somehow or another the Palestinian Authority. The people who were ruling, or supposed to rule, Gaza and the West Bank, and in fact, they were despised by the Palestinians themselves because of the way
because they'd almost they would become like what is it, the Vichy regime in France.
Yeah, like it's like a Animal Farm where they they
They're
look out
basically
and they see
collaborators with Israel.
which ones are the pigs and which ones are the
Yeah,
humans. You know, I sort of one
yeah,
last question, and it sort of segues into what we're going to talk about next, and that is, it'd be very interesting, I said, to know the views of most Jewish people in Britain and Ireland. It'd be particularly interesting to talk to the wife of Sir Keir Starmer, who's Jewish,
yeah,
and find out
yeah.
what her thinking on this.
Mm,
You would have thought actually that would be a reasonable thing to do, but maybe because she doesn't put her, she's not involved in politics, maybe
yeah,
it's unfair. But certainly, wives have influence on husbands, and
yeah,
somebody has been whispering in Starmer's ear, or maybe that's the way Starmer is.
yeah,
He's totally in favor of Israel, and he
yeah.
just dismisses what happens to Palestinians. Okay, I
Ju-
said.
Just, just to, before you leave it, this is the man when he was asked in the very early days. Remember the Israeli general who said, "We're dealing with animals here, and we will cut off the water, we will cut off the food, we will cut off the medicines, we will cut off the electricity. This is what you do to animals." When he was asked, he was asked directly, and this is the leader of the opposition in Britain. I know, I think it was the Saturday or the Sunday, and was this acceptable? And he went, yeah, in other words, that was okay. Okay, he resigned from it somewhere later when somebody said, Jesus, Keir, do you realize what you, but it was his emotional instinct was to say, yeah, it's all right. They're only
Yeah.
animals, let them starve.
Well, I'm tempted to have sympathy with him in that it's a war and terrible things happen in wars. And, you put pressure of all kinds on people to get them to submit to your will. So maybe that was part of what he was doing. But then again, as you say, it comes out of that notion of Palestinians as being less than human somehow. And that
Uh,
I can't get rid of that
you
image
know,
of the all the people rushing around the food trucks. They really did
yeah,
look like
like little
ants, like
instinct.
insects on
Uh,
an anthill.
yeah.
And
Aye.
I think that was
And by the way, Jude, the fact that we're even there's that, like, when you consider the fact, because it all boils down to not one single Israeli is injured. 112 Palestinians are dead. 800, apparently, according to some of the reports, up to 800 are injured. And then for the Israelis to come on and say, look, nothing to do with us. That's just sickening.
it's too bad. It's too bad. Okay, listen, we'll leave the Middle East, Pat. I don't think I could speak
Yeah.
anymore. Even Macron and company are saying that they are disgusted. I mean, Macron is
No.
quite I would have seen him as a
Oh,
pro-Israeli
he was up.
figure.
Yeah, yeah.
But he is saying that he wants to express my strongest condemnation of these shootings and call for truth, justice, and respect for international law.
Bollocks.
Well, Jones, what I say to that, you should have been
Three
saying
months
that
later,
about
when
2 months ago.
30,000 dead, yeah,
3 months ago. Anyway, let's
yeah.
move to George Galloway, who I always have found a very interesting figure. George Galloway in Rochdale yesterday wiped the floor with the opposition. He had a very clear majority saying, "You're our MP." Now, what do you think of that? Are you glad?
I think
Are you
George.
embarrassed? What?
I think you can't get away from this. George said it was a vote for Gaza. He says this is for Gaza,
That's
and
right.
so on. And Jude, the fact that he got 40% of the vote, you know, and the Labour guy got 7%. Yeah, I know Labour disowned him and so
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah.
Even the Tory went ahead of him. But
Uh-huh.
Jude, the bottom line is, I think Starmer and Sunak are off track with the vast majority of people in Britain who are sickened, what they see going on in Gaza,
Mhm.
and so on. And Jude, I am not sure how this would repeat in a general election,
Well,
but
Pat, he thinks it's gonna. He claims that there's a shifting of tectonic plates, which is not an original image, but that's what he's saying is
yeah,
happening. And he's saying, Keir Starmer, you will pay a high price for the role that you've played in enabling, encouraging, and covering for the catastrophe presently going on in occupied Gaza in the Gaza Strip. So he's saying it's not just this, it's going to be across Britain, or across England anyway, whenever the general election is held. Do you think, will he? Do you think that's what will happen? Will he damage?
No, Jude, I think George is a singular figure. Jude, do you recall? Remember, he was sort of almost summoned rather than invited to the American House of
Oh, yeah.
Representatives about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was about the Middle East. And these guys were, almost sort of saying that he should be jailed for his opinions and so on. And if they expected some sort of sacrificial lamb to come along and sort of be chastised, George went for them big time. And the thing, Jude, not one of them had the balls to take him on. They sat there, he said, I don't need people like you to tell me, and they didn't open their mouths. Jude, it was amazing. As it went on, they went more and more silent. And I thought, fair to them. But anyway, George last night is basically saying that Starmer in particular has got it wrong. That this is the politicians, the establishment have got it wrong, and that there's a real view. But how many other George Galloways are there out there? See, when it comes to a general election, the British people should are see anybody that believes in a royalty. They are not a left-leaning nation. They are right-wing. They're conservative.
Well, it's hard. Yeah, I tend to agree with that. But no, I think it would be possible to park your reverence or respect for the royal family and say, I like the idea of the royals, and it's nice to read about them and so on. And then, I've got different policies when it comes to politics in.
It's just, what do you call it? What 5 of the last 7, 8 prime ministers, except for the female, went to Eton. They love their old colonels, and they have this respect for the old toffs. Like any other country, Jacob Rees-Mogg would be a figure of fun, a caricature. Instead of that, he gets himself elected and then gets himself into the cabinet. Dude, if you wanted to take the piss out of of lions led by donkeys, get Jacob Rees-Mogg out there. And you go, are you people serious? I remember somebody taking the piss out of Kim Jong-il, the North Korean, about the way the slavish devotion of the North Koreans and particularly their television coverage of them. Dude, the death of the Queen, and by the way, I actually quite like the Queen. The British coverage of that was so, oh my God, dude, it was shades of North Korea.
Yeah, that's right. It's the beloved leader. I was wondering, well, Galloway will be. I know even nobody else was to be elected on his coattails, and I think there will be a number of people because the old trick of, say, Mary Lou McDonald would be up beside some candidate, say, in the south. So you'll have a popular leader, and that will sort of carry on the coattails.
Here, let me throw a curveball at you. I would love to see Jeremy Corbyn setting up a party because I believe there's a whole tranche of people that think like me and you across Britain and Ireland. I would like, that sort of old-fashioned, what now is considered a left wing. It used to be considered middle of the road. It used to be called human decency. I believe in politicians telling the truth. I believe in principle. I believe that you treat people fairly. I think compassion in politics is actually a decent thing. See the Trumps, the Urbans, the Boris Johnsons, all those sort of people. I detest what they stand for. To get the power, if you lie, you cheat. Oh, you're to be admired. No, you're not. If I can't trust, dude, if I was going to war, I would want to go to war with a guy who I knew would have my back and I would have his. Not the first shot that he would push me in front of him. That's the sort of the politics that we're seeming to know. And we're supposed to admire this.
There's a lot of that about, I'll tell you. I mean, Keir Starmer, for example, wasn't he part of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet?
He was cabinet, and none of he became leader. Then he stabbed him in the back.
Yeah. But that's the name of the game. There's one other thing about Galloway that I find interesting, and some people say he destroyed his political career, but he's proved them wrong. Was when he went on that reality show. What was it, Big Brother? Yeah, where he was doing a cat impersonation of a cat. I'll tell you something now. I thought he did it bloody well. I can't see any other politician doing that as well. I thought he was a very good cat. But he obviously, people, when they look at him, they'll say, is this a guy who can talk? Is this a guy who's got the kind of values that we have in terms of the Middle East? And they say, yes, okay, that's fine. Now, there are other politicians. Some of them, I'm amazed at how many of them come through. I always thought that was a fatal wound. Once you went onto a reality show, if you're a politician, you were dead. Your career was over. I looked up at a few examples. Nadine Dorries. Her career is over. There's no doubt about that. She was on the game show. I forgot, Celebrity or something. Ed Ball.
But she's a fact. But the fact she's a clown's got nothing to do with either, Jude. No.
Ed
Go ahead,
Ball
sorry.
was on strict dancing.
He'll never be taken seriously again.
I always thought he had possibilities, but his wife's.
No, he's a very talented man politically, but
Anyway, Stanley Johnson was on. I was a celebrity getting out of here.
He wasn't a politician,
but he was responsible for a politician. And do you know who was in a reality show? Amazing. Penny Mordaunt was in a reality show.
That's right. Yeah.
She was in Splash. I didn't even know it existed. In 2014, she was in Splash, and Tom Daley, the guy, the professional diver, not professional, but he dived for Britain in the Olympics. That he was the kind of coach or the guy who was nurturing them. But I actually saw a report on it, and there was a big photograph of Penny Mordaunt in a swimsuit standing on the end of a diving board. And I swear, the reason she was in that was so they could get a picture of Penny Mordaunt in a swimsuit.
What's it going to? I remember Anne Woodicombe as well.
What was she in? What was she in?
She was in that Saturday. Dancing on Ice. The dance show. It's on a Saturday.
Yes. She's been in quite a bit of a few shows, reality shows where she's touring around or some question or her background or whatever.
Remember, my opinion of Anne Woodicombe, there was a woman forced to give birth while still handcuffed.
Yeah.
And Anne Woodicombe was a conservative spokesperson at the time. Yeah. And she saw nothing wrong with that. And I thought if any man had come on and said what she said, there would have been absolute outrage.
Yeah.
By the way, Jude, here, hey, come here. Just change now.
Okay. Grinding of gears. Use the clutch. You can hear the
gears. Last week, Brendan Rodgers, the Celtic manager, during an interview when it ended, Celtic had lost the game, and he was interviewed by a female reporter. At the end of the report, he says, "I'm going to have to sort someone out in the club." And she says, "Well, will you tell us what it is?" And then he says, "No, not." And she puts him a wee bit. He says, "Are we finished? Good girl and left." The reference to good girl was considered sexist, misogynist, and all the rest of it. Now, here's the point I'm throwing at you. I have heard millions of football guys, good lad, see you later. No problem. But it was all over the headlines. Do you think saying good girl, are we finished, good girl, see you later? Do you think that was worthy of 3 or 4 days headlines as a big kerfuffle on social media and big discussions? Do you think saying good girl is now sexist?
No. Well, I think he should probably. The fact of the matter is, women don't like, when you and I were young, Pat, women were flattered if you called them a girl. Now, if you call them a girl, a fully grown woman, a girl, they really tend to not like it. They see it as being, talking down to them, and you're a little ornament, a little girl. So I suppose if you take it from that point of view, you could see it as being something he shouldn't have said. But let's face it, I mean, this thing of seizing on the odd word that people use, mother of God, I mean, there must be something better to do with your time if you're a sporting journalist and you're asking the manager of Celtic about some aspect of the game. He did a little talk, so he did, about that. I saw a clip of it. Did you see it on YouTube?
No.
He said, well, he had thought about this, and he talked to the woman. See what I did there? He talked to the woman, and she had no problem with it. He said, actually, he said, I feel sorry for society. I tend to agree with him there. This obsession with saying, this is a good person, they use language this way. This is a bad person. They slipped up there. They used that word. I'll be
Uh,
honest with you, it's more often
uh,
women than men that do that.
yeah. No, no, I thought, Jude, I've heard it a million times, and I literally have,
You're
well,
very
maybe
quick,
not,
quick,
I
quick
can't,
now,
I haven't,
yeah.
but no, I hear people saying good lad, and there's
Ah,
no way, look,
ah,
context even
no.
in the late, Jude, it's just, you say it then,
No, it's
good
not
lad,
the
see you
same,
later,
Pat. It's not the same.
good girl, see you later. No, Jude,
Not the same.
the
It's not the
context
same,
in which
Pat.
it
I'll
was,
explain it to you next week. Okay.
no, no, Jude, the context is the same. It is the
Ah, yeah,
same.
it's
I'm
not the same,
implying
but
it's
it's a different
different.
thing. Okay. Okay, Pat. Well
Good luck.
done. Good
Bye,
lad.
Jude.
Good lad.
Good luck.
Good lad.
Cheers. Good girl.